I'm here.
Hi.
Hi.
Finally.
Hello. Okay, so we are up and
Live.
live and
Hello,
running.
everyone.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Let me quickly introduce our program today. I hope you can all hear me very clearly. So today's event is on the occasion of Yoshitomo Nara's exhibition, After I'm Cosmic Dust. Pace Online is pleased to present a conversation between myself, Yeewan Koon. I'm a professor and author of the first major monograph on the artist, which is published by Phaidon Press in 2020, so this year. And also with independent curator Mika Yoshitake, curator of the current exhibition, Yoshitomo Nara, at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Nara's After All I'm Cosmic Dust is on view at 540 West 25th Street, New York, and it presents the never-been-seen-before drawings alongside some of Nara's personal items related to his artistic process, but also his inspiration, and is open to the public through online scheduled visits between now and October 24th. So do go and try and catch that if you are in the city. But I'm going to pass this over now to Mika, who's going to kick off our conversation.
Great. Thanks, Yuan. Hi, everyone. I am pleased to present the Phaidon book that Yuan has beautifully written, which came out this year, and the LACMA retrospective, which is installed but the museum is still waiting to reopen. And so I'm showing the catalog, as well as we created a deluxe edition with a vinyl record that includes songs that were personally selected by Nara from the 60s and 70s, folk music, as well as Yola Tango's covers of some of the songs that Nara selected. And so the book also includes music liner notes that Nara has written about. And so I just wanted to kind of introduce the well, we both wanted to talk about what we've learned from working with Nara, and also the works, some of his most favorite works that are both in the Phaidon publication as well as in the exhibition, and kind of focus on three main areas of his practice: his music, as well as the girls that are so iconic, and also in the end, if we have time, the kind of spiritual, animistic, political side of his work as well. And so I'm going to be showing some images of the installation, which is at LACMA at the moment. This is the entrance to the exhibition, and we have a whole wall of vinyl records that the artist has collected over the last 30 years. And this exhibition is quite unique in the sense that it focuses really on the earliest music that he listened to when he was basically since he was 9, and it was during the Vietnam War, and a lot of it he has a kind of unorthodox art education in the sense that he fell in love with the album covers. And so, for example, the kind of hand-sewn, hand-painted, very detail-oriented aspect of some of the folk music covers, like Luke Gibson on the left here, as well as Joni Mitchell, who painted some of her own portraits that appeared on the covers. He went very... Nara would actually go really deep. Even if he didn't understand the lyrics, he was really understood some of these... or would learn about the music through these images.
I think it's really interesting what you say, how he goes from very early on, because I mean, he made his own radio when he was 8 years old.
Right.
He's been listening to music, ever since then. I mean, he still recalls the first time he collected, saved all his pennies and went to the record store to buy the record, and how it was this illicit pleasure of going to this grown-up world. It's such a fond and embedded memory. I mean, music, just the whole, it's not just listening to music, it's the whole experience of it all. That's so important to him.
Yeah. And when you read his writings, you can see that, he knows about all of the backstories, like this Discover America cover. It's actually designed by a Japanese designer, but it's to him this kind of iconic American pop, and with this perspective of the two Greyhound buses, and then also this Chris Smither album. When he saw John Baldessari's work, he immediately thought of this album. So it's kind of like music really teaches him how to look at art and to really understand visual language. So I'm just going to scroll through some of the more kind of didactic examples of, there are some motifs throughout Nara's practice, like the girl submerged, half submerged in water. And here you see In the Deepest Puddle from 1995, Middle, and In the Milky Lake, and Shadow Puddles, which has this kind of dish-shaped bandage technique. But these, he actually was looking at this album, John Hyatt. I mean, it's loosely, related, but you can kind of see, how he transforms the motifs into his own.
Yeah, and he really likes picking up certain just lyrics from a line and just playing around with it. I mean, even when not necessarily to do with art practice, he himself would just sometimes doodle lines on the lines. He's even translated lines from English to German, or Japanese to German and English, because he can play around with all those languages as well. And it's just really interesting how he's like constantly obsessed about these music in a very different way. And it does inform his art practice, but he also has this side. I mean, I think it was until last year, for a very short period of time, he had his own radio show in Japan. And it was dedicated only to, and it was very strict. It was only dedicated to talking about music, but he did it for about a year on top of everything else he's doing. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize he has such a big aspect of he's not just an artist, but also, he devotes so much time to go traveling and really kind of working with different communities, especially in the north of Japan.
That's a great drawing. That's a great drawing you're showing, the roots.
Yeah, this is what Nara calls roots, like the root of a tree, but this is his personal genealogy of music, kind of like Alfred Barr's, diagram, but like what he really started to listen to, and the root of his being, basically, this is the formation of his himself. And we actually have this as the cover of the vinyl record.
I mean, I'm glad you brought up drawing, because drawing is so important to Nara. I think one of the things people, when they look at his paintings, they don't realize especially the image of the girl, which he is most famous for. I mean, the painting that really, in some ways, established that path that he's on and that he took, started in 1991 when he did Girl with the Knife Behind Her Back, which is that iconic painting, which I hope, this is the one. But the story behind all of this is that he was in Düsseldorf when he did this painting, and it was actually for his graduation show. And it was for his graduation show, it was actually picked up by a gallery there who saw this, and actually it was the whole installation. And they didn't even realize when they were looking at this painting that he was a Japanese artist. They weren't thinking about manga, they weren't thinking about anime, because that wasn't really that present in the popular sphere in 1991 in Düsseldorf at that moment in time. But one of the things was that he was heavily influenced by his teacher, A.R. Penck. And
there he is.
So, great. And he still has a little slip of couple of slips of paper that Penk gave him, you know, from the discussions. And it was Penk who said to him, you need to bring your drawings and your painting together.
Right.
And it was really because based on those words that he started exploring that big, thick, you know, the thick black lines.
The outlines. Right.
Yeah.
And so I have a drawing.
Yes, you can see that's one of the early drawings that Nara did, and you can see it's a very painterly line. It's not a you know, a drawn line in that same sense, but he starts removing all the background, right? He simplifies it, so it's just about the figure. Yeah. And once he gets that, you know, once he cracks that, that's how the girl with the knife was born. And and he carries on working with that. And that's, oh, you've got some great, you can see through his drawings how he develops these ideas, which I think is, the drawings are just so, you know, they're so at the crux of his craft, the way he thinks, how he thinks through things. And it's all there. And you just got to tease it out. I mean, he's got, I don't know how many drawings do you have in the show? I mean, he's got,
we have 700
so many.
400 of the drawings are framed, and so what you're seeing here is the first wall, so from 1984 to 1987 or so. And here, Eater Lichter is actually in this wall, as well as the Zero fighter jet, you know, plane imagery, and it's quite dark. This is prior to the girl, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was
like a German iconoclasm.
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely very, before the girl, he was expressing a lot of things. But once that established, that girl with the knife, you see it developing. And he tries to move away from the black line, because you can see it's got that incredible, you know, really striking color palette. So his early work has a lot of that as well.
Talk about the change from that angle, right? The stare, it becomes directly right at you instead of the side view, because it's very different. There's an intensity,
a much more connection with the viewer, and I think that's something that he really establishes. I think one of the things that he does, I always think of his paintings as really trying to connect with people on the margins of society, whether it's children, refugees, the elderly, the people from the north. He's really trying to get us to connect with them in these ways, and he does this by doing these ways that we will actually read into the painting easily, right? So we literally stand above the girl as if we're the adults looking down at her, and we're communicating with her. And I think that's what makes this so successful. I mean, we're put in a position where we have to, at the same time, take care of her, but also maybe not, because although he wants to connect that empathy, the people that he paints, or the people he takes photographs of, they're also survivors, right? They're also they're strong characters. And I think that balance between the person who is a survivor, who is strong, and the person as us as viewers having that sort of connection is kind of what is the power of why we keep getting drawn to his artwork so often. And I think
because everyone sees something about themselves in the work, you know. And there's that psychological intensity.
You see a friend or your sister,
right?
Or, you know, you see some sort of personal connection, and I think it's also partly achieved by how simple it is. And so The Longest Night, which you also have up, I mean, that's the colorful palette he was doing. But the next stage, that one of the things he then explores is that he tries to take away the outlines. He erases the outlines, and he kind of blurs them out a little bit as well. So that
it starts getting more pale, right? Like
that's
this one, Abandoned Puppy.
This is such a lovely, sweet paint, and you can see it's no longer that dark in your face sort of black bold painter, but he's also put, I mean, that's got bandages on it, right? So it's very textured as well.
Yeah, so what he said was he would have, you know, leftover strips of canvas in his studio, and he just started to use them because he didn't want to throw them away. And so he would recycle, you know, put them on the surface of his canvas and then paint over it. But then it creates such a textural, emotional quality of, you know, that
I think we should talk about, because the way he paints is also really interesting for such an established artist. I think something that people should know is that he paints on his own. He doesn't have assistants. He kind of just goes into his studio, turns on the music really loud and just paints through the night. And then he wakes up in the morning, and depending on how successful it is, he would either, you know, treat himself to a cup of tea or just relax. But he basically has been doing this since he first started, even as a studio. I was talking to some of his earlier friends from his school days, and they said he's always just been there. He's just, you know, he seems to be this fun cat because he's very lively. He's very charismatic.
Yeah.
But when it comes to his work, he would just shut out. He would just do it, and then he would just get into his zone. So he's also has that side to him as well, which I think is also interesting.
Yeah. So in the show, he really just created his own. He treated the space of the museum like it was his own studio or space, and so center lines, it didn't matter. He actually just installed really low or really high and created this kind of, you know, interiority.
Why did he do that? Because that's really interesting, the high low.
I think it just creates an intimate space for some of the viewers, and of course, you know, looking at here, let me see. I have Princess of Snooze and Sprout the Ambassador is much, and the one on the left is Missing in Action. But this room, it comes after a whole series of rooms where there's, you know, the drawing house and then the vases, and then all of a sudden it's just this beautiful. It feels like you're floating on a cloud.
I mean, he's someone who thinks very spatially. I mean, he really thinks very carefully about how he wants his paintings to be seen as well. I mean, he does pay a lot of attention to the viewer's experience of his work, and I think he really, which I really like. And that's also, you know, Princess Snooze. If we just look, that's his next stage. He experiments with bigger. Once he's done the erasing of the background of the lines, his next stage is he really goes into these large-scale, very pale palette works.
Right, and then the compositions are also a little off, not centered.
And they kind of have this sense of presence about them. But again, then you know, he's always pushing himself. He sort of like, he figures out, all right, I've done this, figured it out. Figured out how to do the outlines, figured out how to erase the outlines, figured out the large scale works. He keeps experimenting with different things. And so after he does this, he starts moving the girl. The girl, I mean, I could say it as the girl growing up, but it's really Nara just explore, and because they kind of seem like they're growing up as well. But then he moves to the torso, just a half torso look. And he also plays with the eyes. And I think that's such an important transition to his paintings. And you see it in his drawings more. Yeah. And that's why the drawings are so important.
Yeah, this is from 2005. It's called Missing in Action, Girl Meets Boy. And it actually is a girl witnessing the dropping of the atomic bomb over Hiroshima. So what you see in the right eye of the girl is the flame of the mushroom bomb, and then of course the left eye remains intact. But I think that's
how he plays with the title in this one. Because it's girls, because little boy is the name of the bomb.
The bomb, right? Exactly.
So Girl Meets Boy, which is, you know, and he's really good with titles as well.
Yeah.
I think I've always wondered, I've never asked him, maybe I should ask him, how much of his title play is also his interest in lyrics and music and words.
I think so. Well. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think there's a definite intuition between the titles of the music.
And this one is in your show, right? Right. And this is also a really important painting in his transition with that half submerged torso and the big eyes, but you can also see the eyes are slightly different. So he paints them differently, but they're more spread out now. And I think that's an important shift for when he starts doing the full frontal portraits. But this one's interesting because behind it is another painting. And you can just see, I don't know how well you can see it on the screen, but in the top, I suppose it's the top left, is the original. You can just about see the original painting, and he painted it and he was like, no, this isn't what I want to do, because in some ways the girl comes so instinctively to him, because he doesn't really think what I'm going to do. He doesn't plan it. He just paints, right? He just paints from whatever is driving him at that moment in time. And he just erased, and then he didn't like it and he just erased it. And actually that erasure is what helped him get to that stage of the
Yeah.
one in the middle.
I
Yeah,
think
it's very
those
powerful.
erasures are so interesting. And I like how in your book you have some of the transitions from completely different, you know, figure
I know.
to,
I mean, it's his paintings. I always
I
think
mean,
this
even the
is
expression, you know, is absolutely, you know, but I think that that's, and then the quality of the colors, that kind of prismatic effect that you see here in the background and also around the water. I know he adapts that into more and more, the richly kind of layered into the hair and also in the eyes as we get, you know, as these portraits kind of mature.
Yeah, I agree. I think and that's why I think paintings from this period are so important, because it's the paint. He's really into colors, and
Yeah.
you can really see his interest in bringing colors to the fore. And so this one is a more recent painting and a really important painting. I'm really just side note, I'm really glad to see so many really important paintings in Nara's Earth that you've included. It's like, well done, Mika.
Well, Nara.
Well, it clearly
It's
wants to
Nara.
show, I mean, this is such an important work for him because it's the first major one of the first major paintings that he did after Fukushima. And
Yeah.
Fukushima really affected him. Well, it affected everyone in Japan and outside of Japan.
Yeah.
But for Nara, because he's actually quite close to his, it's actually en route when he travels from Tokyo to his hometown when he sees his mum. And so it really affected him deeply. And for a while, he had a massive show coming up, but he couldn't paint. So this has happened to him before. And it took him a little while to get into it. And Miss Spring is one of those paintings where he kind of poured a lot of his emotions into there. And so for him,
he only made one painting, right, in 2011.
He did one for do something to raise funds. But in terms of his large scale works, he didn't really make any paintings. This is really the main one that he did.
Yeah.
And
because I think he really only made it was in the Milky Lake, which that
yes
one that was in 2011, and then this is 2012.
2012. And I think this is such a successful painting. And if you get a chance to go to LACMA and see this, I mean, you'll see that the eyes are two completely different colors. Yeah. And you kind of get mesmerized. So as a viewer, because one of the things he's also done with these half torso painted girls is he's taken away the knives, he's taken away the sprouts. It's just the girl. It's very quiet. Yeah. And I think he just wants the viewer to stand in front of there and just, by looking at his works, kind of turn inwards and self-reflect too, because it's such a moment of deep thinking that needed to happen in Japan and elsewhere in the world as well. So I think and it's a beautiful painting. It's an absolutely gorgeous painting.
And it was
all different strokes, right? I mean, the hair's painted differently, the body's painted differently.
Well, to me, it's like an abstraction, even though, yes, it is a portrait. But when you look at each aspect of the painting, I mean, it's like the sublime, and in Rothko. And I think he's really looking at modern art and the light, and how light affects, and just some of the layers that, it just seems like, it feels like the light is really emerging from the pigments of the face.
Yeah, there's such a shininess, especially in the cheeks areas. The way he uses light colors, there seems to be a sort of inner glow that comes out of the paint itself, and then as a result out of the person. But it's really out of the paint. It's a wonderful color experiment as well.
Yeah.
Which if you think about it, it's a very unusual. It's a beautiful painting, but it's rather unusual that it was used as he actually allowed the people who were protesting against the return of the nuclear power plant, and he actually gave them permission to use this artwork as part of their protests. And so you often see Miss Spring on these rallies as well, that you can see in that photo that you've also attached.
Right. So I know that Ryuichi Sakamoto actually published a book, and there is about the Fukushima the nuclear protests, and this was on the cover. This image was on the cover of the book. This is a installation shot from the LACMA show with
gorgeous.
Miss Spring and Emergency, which is also a personal favorite, right, of Nara's.
Yes, it's a personal favorite of Nara's.
Yeah,
and it's an interesting painting, and part of the reason why it's so important to him is that he's returned to billboard paintings.
Yeah.
Because he stopped doing billboards after 2010. So billboard paintings are paintings that's done on the large wooden plank structures.
Like the 1 Foot in the Groove. It's the first image that I showed. Let's see.
Yes.
This one.
Yes. So, I mean, he started doing that at the time when he was building the houses as well, because he saw an extension of the houses. So it was really during that period where you see the billboard paintings. But when he stopped making the houses, he actually stopped making billboards. And it's only after 2011 he starts bringing billboards back, and it's actually really interesting because he keeps looking back at his old stuff as well. So actually a lot of so he's bringing back billboards, but it's also a very drawing painting, and he's combining a lot more of his drawings and paintings and other practices together now. So I think right now he's doing really interesting stuff, exploring his own history, right? His own practices as well.
Sure.
So it's kind of cool what he's doing. It's a lovely, lovely little painting. One big painting. And I can see why he's very attached to it. And
this was an actual experience he had, right? Of a girl who was being kind of during the crisis after the earthquake and tsunami, being taken away. On a gurney.
Yeah, this was sort of a witness account of something he saw, which is part of why he's very attached to it as well. I mean, it really was a deeply moving moment. I mean, we were talking about how he couldn't work and he couldn't paint, and what he did do. I mean, you know, lots of people asked him to do things. Would you mind holding a show so people want to see art? And he was thinking, well, how is that going to help society? Yeah. So what he did, and he hasn't actually publicized this, but what he did was actually he sent out on his account and went to schools and said, who would like to hear me talk about art and do art things together? And he did little workshops of things. I mean, one time he went to a little, what would it be called? High school in America, or when it's like children about 8 or 9? I don't know.
8 or 9 would be elementary school.
Elementary school. So he went to a Japanese elementary school and started... because a lot of them, he realized they lost all their photographs. And so they had no memories. And so what he did was he gave them these long flags, you know, those fish flags, those flags, and he turned them into clothing with the kids. The kids started making clothing, and then he took lots of photographs of them so that he can give back to them, so that they will have photographs and memories that were happy rather than sad. I mean, that's you know, he's kind of, you know, those are the
kind of heart-wrenching to hear.
It is. Well, this is another set of really billboard drawings, right?
On jute. He's using jute bag materials, right? So it's not canvas, and the line is very distinct, the outline. But these are actually from originally from this historical movie Hiroshima from 1953. Some of the actual scenes. I mean, it's incredible that Japan actually they made a movie about Hiroshima so soon after, with using extras who had experienced the war. And so the girl like emerging from the shelter. I mean, that
one is actually based on that also looks a little like Abandoned Puppy. It's the same pose.
Wait, the one on the right? Yeah.
The one on the right, Abandoned, because she's emerging out of the shelter. That's also him revisiting his old works as well. That's a lovely
the girl on the Hitler head, which this is what I love about him. You know, it's just like, I mean, it's a very serious subject matter, but then, you know, he just kind of twisted into this in such a minimal way.
I mean, these
maximal effect.
You're right, the lines are really powerful, so you really get an impact from them from really far away, and as you get closer that impact gets stronger and stronger. But you can really see these paintings from, I mean, even as a little picture in the Instagram thing, you can really see them quite clearly, because they're supposed to have that visual impact, right? And that's kind of what he's looking for with these really stripped down. There's barely any colors, and it's just drawings, which is him moving away from that drawing, that painting thing that he was doing before. So I think these are really super important works as well.
Yeah. And then going back to the Fukushima, you know, and the Great East earthquake and tsunami. So this is an installation shot from the Yokohama museum retrospect or exhibition in 2012, which is the year right after the disaster. And yeah, do you want to talk about the bronzes?
Oh, these bronze heads they're massive. First of all, they're massive. They're absolutely massive. And this was at the time when he was struggling with trying to figure out how to paint or what to draw. And he knew he had this big show coming up. So he actually he returned back to his old school, his alma mater. And there he worked in the studio alongside with the other students. He wanted to kind of go back and hunker back down in a familiar environment, but also with a community environment. He thought that was really important to him. Right. And basically, I mean, he described it. He basically had a lump of clay, and he just like a sumo wrestler. He just threw himself at this clay because it's right. And he's just like
lump of earth, his body. So you really get his like the finger, everything, every part. You know, like
and he wants that idea. It's in some ways it's I think it's a response to Fukushima. It's the permanence, our own permanence, our sense of permanence on Earth. How do we leave traces of ourselves? What does it even mean to leave a trace of ourselves, right? And so part of working in bronze is partly to do with that. But he really wanted to get. I mean, you can really see in a lot of his sculptures from this period. You can really see the tiny details. His thumbprints.
Yeah, I have another shot from Flamenco. But and just the oblong heads, you know, just that more, it's very, you know, in between human and, you know, this kind of spirit.
Yeah. And also I think he's in some ways that sort of technique of throwing himself and that putting his fingers marks all over it, that sort of very visceral impact on it. It's a lot like his paintings. And he also thinks of these in some ways, you know, they're kind of that blurring of there's something about the way he does the faces as well that almost look like the painterly effects that you get with, like, say, on Miss Spring. We were talking about how there's all these different textures. You really see that on these large sculptures as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
well, what was interesting is that you know, I was going to get into the pandemic as well, but you know, we had a very, very intense period of installation, and the exhibition was delayed, and so we included a new work in the LACMA exhibition that I think relates really closely with the bronze works, and it's this piece here. It's called Light Haze Days, and
is that the one he did during the pandemic?
Yes. So he completed this in mid-June of this year, and because we were installing the show, and can you imagine, so he installed in March, the week of the shelter in place when that took effect. So he had to go back to Japan after 3 days, and then and then he came back to LA in mid-June. So it was between that time that he made this painting. And stylistically,
he carried it with him.
Well, I actually felt that it was important, since this is a retrospective exhibition, that we should have the latest work, and of course that is responding to our time now.
This is so different as well in many ways.
Yeah, right? And I have some details too. But what you were just talking about with the you know, the imprint, I think that I mean, it's not the hand, but it's the like real deliberately, you know, the kind of shift in some of the gestures, the brush strokes that are, you know, deliberately looks like it's unfinished. But
yeah, I really like that. He's been doing more recently, and I don't know what direction he's going to take this, because I think this is why I think it's so exciting that you're doing this show the book's coming out at this moment in time, because I think it's actually all going to change soon as well.
Yeah.
Because I think he's exploring something
Right.
that which is the unfinished, right? And I think that really comes from, you're right, I never even thought about that link, that somehow the bronzes that has this sort of unfinished look to it is kind of then feeding back into his painting. But the colors of this is also very different. It's much, I haven't seen this, I can't wait to see it when you open up again.
It's the last piece in the show. But I'm curious, you know, what you would think, because it's, you know, even though it has this kind of unfinished quality around, you know, in the hair area, the face, it's very different as well.
Yeah, the face is very different.
Yeah, from the past, or even like the last 2-3 years. So like this is Midnight Truth, I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. And, you know, it's those two works on the left and the middle. It's much, I think they have this like sharpness and this kind of inscrutable face where it's almost like mask-like. And as the colors, you know, it just there's a real clear-cut palette. Whereas here, you know, it's much more like impressionistic, and it has, well, he calls it kind of like this in between, you know, Vuillard and
yeah, I mean, I think
Matisse.
one of the things, I think this is different. I think you're right in that because the thing with looking at Nara's work, and maybe it's just spending and I don't know whether you feel this way, because when you look at a lot of Nara's work, you suddenly realizes that actually the little differences that he makes are actually very important. I think even just changing there is something about the face is shifting a little bit. I think they're more, in some ways it's kind of more confrontational, this one, or it's more, there's something about her that seems to be more connecting. The other ones tend to be quite ambivalent. And the ones that you were showing on the walls, I mean, a lot of those he was looking back at modern Japanese wartime paintings. It was definitely very interesting about that.
Yeah, like Leonardo Fujita.
Yeah. So he was really thinking about the ambivalence that those painters had, you know, both being people who was against war but had to participate in the war, you know, that sort of weird space that people had about violence in general. And I think he kind of had to capture that sort of ambivalence, right, in his other works.
The complicity.
Yeah. I mean, there's this one, I've seen some of these other drawings where, and Pace up some of them as well, they're sort of a little more aggressive in your faces sometimes as well, but it's different from the ones that he did before, like Girl with the Knife. I think these ones are much more emotionally aggressive because they're not actually doing, and they're not carrying anything. Because Girl with the Knife, you need that knife to make her feel aggressive. But with the other ones,
they have signifiers, whereas this one is much more of a gestural.
So I think that's also one of the things that's really interesting that's happening at the moment.
So these are, you know, a little bit more recent, from 2000. This is actually a piece of mine from 2019, which is the primary image of the LACMA show.
Right.
Yeah. And sorry, I have a child.
I love this one. Yes, this is.
Yes, and I wanted to just bring up the ties between some of the more meditative aspects of his practice, and how that relates to just his recent and the return to folk, and just the one thing that, you know, message that I think if people could get out of the show is if the atmospheric kind of power of music could really be understood through his paintings, especially that what you experience when you're listening to folk, and the kind of healing quality, and, you know, kind of bringing that emotional quality to the work is something that he would love, if, you know.
And I like this one. This is, I mean, her eyes is down, but you can just see a little bit of her eyes.
I wish I could show a detail, but you can actually see the pupils under the eyes in this one. And this is actually ceramic. So it's not bronze, but it's
painted on top.
Painted, yes. And
I think it does have that two side, right, of him, that sort of meditative side, and then also the side that responds to whatever is happening in the outside world. And you really see that, I think, when you put in contrast his drawings and his photography. I mean, I understand you don't have photography and you're focusing much more less on his paintings and things, but his photography is, I think, an area that you see him really developing. These are more of his earlier ones. This is a set that he did in Afghanistan, and with these photographs, I mean, there's full of life about the people. There's some of them, they're incredibly powerful as well. But if you contrast his photographs from this particular period next to his drawings, his drawings are quite dark.
So this is also drawings from his trips, right, to Afghanistan.
And I think you have some of the drawings in your show.
We have the drawings, but not the photographs.
And if you get a chance to, if people put them side by side, you can just see that two side of him, that side that wants to give. Because when he's taking these photographs of these people, he was always, he wrote in his diary how he was so affected by how positive they were about, how they were so open. They opened him to to their homes and offered him things that they had nothing. So in some ways, he also wanted to give he wanted to give that strength back to the people that he was photographing. He recognized their agencies, right? But he also it's in his drawings where you really see that darker side of where, or his more emotional side. And he does have those two sides of Nara, and I think that's something that also I try to bring out in my book, and I'm sure you will bring it out in your exhibition. He does have these very two complex sides that are often working side by side or together sometimes. But they're two very different sides of him.
Yeah, and he never is overtly political, but there's one painting that he does, include, which is this Queen Tamar after Nico Pierce-Fini, which we don't have in the show. But
I included that one in. It's such an unusual painting because it has Article 9, which is a part of the Japan's constitution about no longer participating in any sort of military campaign or war. The army cannot be used for war. And the fact that he actually declared this. So, and this was a work that he did for a show which was honoring Nico's anniversary. And so he did this painting in response. And I think one of the things that is happening as he is, he himself has talked about he's getting older, and he's recognizing aging, and he wants to make more of a statement, the things that he really cares about as well. And I think that's coming out in some of his works, and this is an example of it as well.
And then we also have the latest work, which is the 26-foot Miss Forest, and this is an early piece called Miss Tannenbaum, or Tannenbaum, and so this is the piece that's in the show, or outside, right in front of LACMA. But
I don't know about you, Mika, but I always think of these. I think about his Shinto roots when I see these works.
I do. Yeah, I mean, this is called Moriko, or the child of the forest in Japanese, and so clearly it's in reference to these incredible, trees from where he's from, the north, where you have these folk tales and myths of the forest, the spirits come in the forest. But what he was talking about in terms of this piece is that he sees it more not really as an artwork per se, but more of a device as a catalyst between humans, or and kind of the outer universe. And so and he was actually likening it to indigenous prayers, and so you also have the figure here kind of in a moment of silence, with closed eyes, and actually you can see his fingerprint on the right eye. It's right where the crease is. I
mean, I suppose just to give some of our the people who's listening something about his Shinto background.
Yeah.
His father was a Shinto priest, although he gave up his Shinto priesthood quite early on, but his grandfather was a Shinto priest. And
so he really grew up with it.
Yeah, and you know, the mountain where he I went to visit to his hometown just to see and get a sense of what the place was like. And of course I went on the snowiest blizzardy day
oh my god
ever be possible. I barely thought I was going to get out there alive. Literally the snow was going across, but it gives you a sense of why the north is so different from you know, when we think about with Japan, we think about Tokyo, we think about urban cities, but the north has a very different feel. The people there are very different, and the sense of place is very different. And so the area where he's from, there's these big mountains, so it's around, and they're very famous mountains with and in particular they're known for their worship of Jitsu, the protector of children. And I didn't make it to the temple. He really wanted me to go and see this temple that he for him is very important, where they have a lot of those Jitsu,
yeah.
And where
so
it's for women, it's largely for parents, particularly women who are going through childbirth, or who've lost their child. And it's this incredible temple dedicated to this, and it's absolutely gorgeous temple. And so as a kid, he's always just, you know, wandered around on these temples. He's just been all these mountains, and I always think that although he doesn't ever write about it and talk about it in very fixed terms, I think that childhood is so important to him. And I often think that actually some of these dolls, even drawing the girls, you know, depiction of the girls is part of what he grew up with as well.
The figurines
as well. And so I always think of his works. Sorry, you know, the one that I often think of the work that you're showing on the screen as almost like those little Shinto Jitsu witnesses to right. So this idea of they're almost like little protectors in some ways.
I think
the environment.
Protective deities for sure.
Protective deities, because he has them and he wants to spread them around. You know, he has little versions of them, right? That you can get smaller ones as well. And I think he wants to spread them out. And there are this idea that maybe we need more of these people who's going to protect and think about protecting the world, the environment around us. Because I think that's another area that he's also exploring in his new works as well, the thinking about the environment, the world where we're going at this moment in time.
I mean, I think the ecological issues are so important in his practice, and I mean, even I think the training also living in Germany, and even through music, you know, the 60s counterculture, the ecological consciousness within, you know, that history as well it's so ingrained through the music, and also, you know, through his cultural upbringing, that is I think is becoming ever more present now, especially with climate change and with the pandemic, these notions of coexistence and how we are so vulnerable, you know, as
you know, I agree. I think these are some of the issues he's really looking at in his work at this moment in time, and I think it's really impacted the way that he's thinking about his work as well, right? And I think he's trying to figure out. The last time I had a conversation with him, he was, you know, we were talking about his work, and he was just thinking about, well, I mean, it's not just about the legacy of who he is as an artist. It's also about what's his art doing. You know, because he does have a very large, and it isn't, you know, he is very popular on the art market and everything else, but he has an incredible fan base. He has an incredible audience.
Absolutely.
And he's always said that actually he paints for, it's the fans that made him in many ways. And his message, he wants to also communicate with them through his art, and their concerns are very much about, well, what does it mean to live the way that we are living at this moment in time, which I think he's thinking and reflecting about in his works. Yeah.
Well, this is the last image actually of our slideshow. So, um,
So did you enjoy your, when is it? We're hoping it's going to be open soon, LACMA.
yeah, I mean, I can't say, it's really up to the county, you know,
Right.
and I think LA, yeah, I mean, it's the rates are, it needs to be stabilized. The coronavirus just, you know, it's very, who knows when the museum really can, but I think it's there, it's looking a little bit more optimistic, and I'm hoping that the show will open at least before the end of this year.
Well, I hope I get to travel out there, because I have to say, you know, when we were preparing for this and you were showing me all the images of the layout, the way it's been displayed, and just that whole message of that folk music message, I think it really comes through in the selection of works that he's for, you know, that you guys have come together, the selection of work. It really does have this idea of trying to think through music, but also this idea of that folk element of, you know, this idea of trying to you know, for want of a better word, want to be inspired to be better, or at least reflect back on what we are doing, right? And it goes back to the music that inspired him to think along those times too. And I think that really comes through in the show, the way that you've got them high-low, you've got them, they're very contemplative,
very contemplative and self-reflexive, and yeah, it's it's like seeing very old friends fresh anew, you know, to get back together. And I think it was a moment of reckoning, I think, for him, seeing everything, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it is tough doing a show, but I'm actually impressed that he went there to install his own show as well.
I mean, there's no way that he could do it virtually, you know, just the salon style hang. With the drawings.
I mean, he is in so many ways, he is that sort of old-fashioned artist, right? Where he has to do this on his own. He works on his own. He doesn't want to have any assistants to help him paint. He's not part of that workshop system. He just wants to, you know, dig deep into his whatever resource he has. And then I think that extends to how he wants his work to be seen, and how he wants people to think about his work. I mean, he really cares very deeply about that experience, the experience of encounter.
He's incredibly pure, I think, and
and rather unusual, I think, for an artist of his status. If you think about the amount of work he makes, I'm always impressed by how quickly he can paint. And when I was interviewing his fellow students, they would always say that at times he would just, and this goes back to his drawing, he was always compulsively drawing on every single surface that was available.
Yeah.
So he would draw, or it'd be the table, it'd be his friend's studio next door. He would just constantly draw.
Like the bandage, the duct tape, the envelopes.
And when he's talking to you, I don't know whether you had this, when I was talking to him, there's partly a language thing between us. He would often draw all the time, and so he would keep drawing and drawing to explain things, and there'd be little doodles on napkins, but you can also see he's trying to resolve issues through drawing. In some ways he finds it easier to figure things out through drawings, and that compulsiveness, I think, is just part of that energy he has as well when he paints. So when he, you know, shuts the door, turns on the music and just paints, I think it's the same sort of that energy inside him that just needs to come out, and so that's why he paints so fast. I mean, it's always very impressive to see him paint.
Well,
but do you do this when you look? Sorry, when you
no, it was great that we were able to have this conversation and just kind of see all of his work in this kind of collective unconscious, you know, into Nara. So
I think I like what you said at the beginning. You know, there is something about how music, drawing, painting, they're all kind of, it's all subliminal in some ways. They're just all part of who he is. And I think that's a really lovely way of thinking about who he is as well.
Well, I hope people can read your book and also come to the show.
Well, read your catalog, because I
Yeah.
love how you got music in a way that I never got music. I think I really tried with music, but it's he yeah, he doesn't, I even listened to lots of music podcasts to think about how music geeks talk about music.
Well, it's
But
just that I think, for example, like I listened to some of the same music that he listened to in the 90s when I was a teenager. And I mean, we're different in age, but like Japanese music. And then all of a sudden I see the like, this was Blanky Jet City. The painting is called like Miss, Blanky. And I'm like, oh, and the figure itself has nothing to do really with, but it's just these
does it make
connections.
you does it make you
Nostalgic?
yeah.
A little bit. Yeah. And then like the Blue Hearts, which is this band that I was in love with, he loves. So I knew
He
all the
loves the
lyrics.
Blue Hearts.
Yeah.
He loves the Blue Hearts. It's really interesting. So congratulations.
No, you
Can't
too.
wait to see the
Congrats.
show. Can't wait to
Thank
Tuesday.
you.
Thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the talk. And please go and visit the show in New York as well at Pace Gallery. And please, if you have time, go to see the show at LACMA when it opened. And there's also a great LACMA YouTube video of an interview between Mika and Nara. That's great. You should also listen to that.
Thank
And
you.
if you like, buy the book.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Say
Bye-bye.
goodbye and sign off. Bye-bye.